Welcome to Direct Response Playbook. I'm your host, Travis Ketchum, bringing you all that there is to know about email marketing and digital marketing in general. And today I'm brought to you with David Cartolano, for those who don't know, who does a lot with newsletters. And we're here to basically answer your burning email marketing questions. Right, David?
Yeah, and we are both really pumped to be here. So let's jump right in.
Yeah. So you're here because you want to know about BIMI. You probably are like, I've heard about this BIMI thing. You don't even know how to say it. And we're here to break it down for you, let you know what it means and why it's important and what you can do to implement it and all that kind of fun stuff. Have you heard of BIMI? Do you call it BIMI or do you call it something else?
I thought it was BIMI for the
BIMI.
longest time. So BIMI, BEMI, I don't know if it's a Zapier versus a Zapier type thing, but it means the same. I don't want to say, trick or hack or authentication, but we can dive deeper into what it is and why it might be a good idea to implement it in your email marketing or a good idea to hold off on it.
Yeah. So let's start with what the initials, the acronyms actually stand for. It's in a world of alphabet soup. It's got all these authentication methods and SPF and DKIM and DMARC, which all are important, by the way, for BIMI to work. But BIMI stands for Brand Indicators for Message Identification. So those of you who normally tune out when you hear something technical, now's your time to tune right back in. Because it's all about branding and basically proving
Right.
who you are, who you say you are, right? Which is really important for authenticity and reputation management, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the ways you can stand out in the inbox, right? You can have your picture. I've seen people have logos or even GIFs where the GIFs themselves stand out in the inbox. So it's a cool little trick, and it's something that is becoming more of an industry standard in 2024.
Yeah. And as we go forward, 2025 and 2026 and so on and so forth, I think this is actually going to be increasingly valuable for brands. So
Yeah.
as we look at, for example, the way that Google has shifted their requirement for authentication, right? Because if you're a higher volume sender, you now are required to have DMARC, which has been best practice for years, but now it is straight up required. Like you will not go to the inbox
Oh
unless
yeah.
you have that, right?
Yeah.
And so while this standard is earlier in its stage so far and developing and evolving, I think that its importance is going to grow over time. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of barriers to entry simply because in order to get one, you have to get a VMC and then you have to pay a certain amount for a license and you have to have somebody set it up for you. So it can also be, and I want to make sure I'm very clear on this because it does provide a level of not only branding, but security, but it can also be for most small business owners and medium-sized business owners I've spoken to, it can be a case of missing the forest for the trees, right? Because if you're not implementing the things you need to implement to get yourself into the inbox, you could have the cutest little spinny logo on the planet, but you're in spam, right? It's like biohacking while eating McDonald's every day and getting 5 hours of sleep, you know?
Yeah. Well, let's just. I totally agree with all of that, but let's just for
Yeah.
people who are like, I had just heard about the standard. What the heck even is it? I'm gonna run down a few things real quick. I think that are like must knows about BEMI, just so
Yeah.
that people are like super actionable about what it is and what it means and where it's applicable. So basically, as we mentioned, it's a way to get your logo to show up next to your name on the from. But it's important to know that it doesn't work on all services. It doesn't work on all mail clients, and doesn't work the same way on all of them, right?
Hmm.
So let's kind of start from the lowest, easiest way to implement and work our way up. There's two rungs above that. So first and foremost, there is a free way to implement BEMI where you can actually, we'll link to a tool down below, but you can actually go and you can upload your image and it will show up for Verizon Media Mail, which you're very familiar with,
Yeah.
which is not only Verizon, but it's also AOL and Yahoo have been kind of lumped together. And if you add your logo there, even with no other work, it will show up for those providers for free. So if you're a small business owner, that's the easiest low-hanging fruit to do. But there are some technical requirements, right? So I don't know if you want to talk about the technical pieces that are required for it to even to show up, though, like the authentication stuff that's required.
Yeah, yeah. And ever since the big Gmail update and Yahoo update in early, March, February-ish 2024, a lot of email service providers have made it easy to authenticate a domain, which for anyone listening, you're like, what the hell is that? It means to put on a name tag that says, I am who I say I am. I'm the person sending these emails from this domain, and I promise that I am not a spammer using this address for malicious activities.
Bring the receipts.
That's it.
Bring the
And that's it.
receipts.
And that's really it, right? But in order to do that, you have to have, and this goes back to the alphabet soup, the DKIM, SPF, DMARC records in place. And if you look at any email service provider that's worth its salt, right, it's going to have these configured already, and all you have to do is copy and paste them into your domain, into your DNS provider like GoDaddy, Bluehost, Cloudflare, whatever. And ever since the update, they've made it even easier to do so because you can just hit a button. But sometimes hitting that button and not doing it yourself does cause errors. And I know
Can
this
cause
because I've
havoc.
seen
I've
it.
seen it. Yeah, I've seen it firsthand.
You've seen it too.
It can break the things that you don't intend to break because they're like, oh, there's one size fits all. They are generally pretty good. I appreciate that they exist because, it's kind of like someone doing something is better than someone doing nothing, right? But they're not always perfect in their execution. So just double check. So if you do one of these automatic things that, you mentioned, David, anyone else who does that and says, man, something else is acting goofy, like go see what did it change, because it might have changed a record it wasn't supposed to. It might have, taken control of something it wasn't supposed to take control of. So that is the inherent risk. But I will say that's probably the minority of the experiences that most people have, but it is a possibility for sure.
And if you're not sure about it, and you could hire someone that knows what the heck they're talking about. You can also copy and paste all of your DNS records into ChatGPT and say, hey, is this configured right? And I've actually found it's pretty accurate. And that's probably better than someone you would get on Fiverr for like $200. You know what I mean? So so that's something, that's a little tip if you're listening to this and you don't want to pay thousands, if not tens of thousands, for someone to look at your stuff.
Well, and also a tip too is whoever your ESP, your email service provider, I got to stop using acronyms.
More alphabet soup, right?
Yeah, whoever your email service provider is, oftentimes they have a vested interest in making sure that this works for you, right? So
exactly,
reaching out to their support, depending on who it is, they may be very willing to jump in there and actually alter, configure, or add the variables for you. So that's a great way of someone who has a vested interest who you're already hopefully paying for a quality email service provider to help you out on that front. But okay, so you get that foundation in place, and then go to the free tools. And by the way, if you want to learn more about DKIM, SPF, and DMARC, we've got more links down below to content about that. But that's not for today's episode. Today we're really focused on BIMI. So there's the free version, right, where basically you're just saying, hey, I've done all my authentication pieces. Here's the link to the logo I'd like you to show, and that will show up for a minority of your recipients, right? Because as we know, most lists are 50 to 80% Google. We actually did an audit of our email volume this week, and we sent a lot of emails at Campaign Refinery. And it's approaching like 90% of the volume that we send is to either Gmail, Google Mail, which always cracks me up when I see that, but that's different than Gmail. And then you include the Google Apps, the Google Workspace, the professional Google product that is essentially Gmail for businesses. It's like almost 90% of our volume, right? So you're thinking, okay, how do I show up for that? And how do I show up for the most popular mail client in the world, Apple Mail? Because those two providers have different requirements to show up than the base free one for Verizon and Yahoo. And actually, one of this intermediary step, this is a new one. I don't know if you've heard about this. Have you heard about the Common Mark certificate?
I haven't.
Okay, so this just rolled out. This was hot off the presses. You used to have to jump all the way up to this really high rung, and now there's this middle rung. So we'll talk about this one first. So if you don't have a trademark and you want your logo to show up in Google, so all of Google properties, right? Google's web version, their mobile apps, like all their various apps, and you want your logo to show up, as well as I believe it also applies to Apple Mail. I'll have to double check that one, but I know for a fact it'll show up for all the Google ones. You can buy a Common Mark certificate, which unfortunately is not very expensive. The best price I could find works out to roughly $1,200 a year. But if you do that, you get essentially a version of like a fancy SSL, which is what you use to make your site secure.
Right.
But it's basically saying, hey, here's my image. Could you host it for me? Could you make sure that it's validated that the image exists? But there's no validation that you own the rights to that image. So it's this intermediary step.
Interesting.
And if you do
Yeah.
that, your logo will show up, but none of the other benefits of the next rung, which we'll talk in a minute. So you can have your logo show up, which is great, but I'm not sure most businesses should honestly do that, because for $1,200 a year, you're still not getting all the benefits of the next rung up, which we'll talk about in a moment. And you're still
Right.
not showing up in every platform. So honestly, I think for most businesses, it's kind of like do the free one or jump all the way to the hard one. Now that you've heard about Common Mark Certificate, or CMC, more alphabet soup, what are your thoughts on Common Mark? Do you think anyone should spend their time doing that? Spend $1,200 a year? Have their logo
Honestly,
next to it?
as someone who has multiple newsletters and is looking to acquire them, I wouldn't even waste my time with a common. It's either all or nothing, right? Is this a priority or is it not a priority? So I would go all the way to the top rung and then put in like what we're going to touch on, the effort and time it takes to do so.
Yeah. So I just wanted to make sure that people knew that this was a middle rung, but also that as someone who sends a lot of email, sees a lot of email, cares a lot about email reputation, I actually think you should skip it. I think you should either do the free one or you should jump all the way up to the top dog, top tier, get all the benefits. Because the only factor really different in terms of your investment for a business is really the time to get to the top one. Because the money's not that different. That's the weird part. Because if it's $1,200 a year for a Common Mark certificate, you're like, whoa, just to have my logo on there? A VMC, a verified mark certificate, is like $1,500 a year. So you're talking $300 a year difference to get all the extra benefits and show up guaranteed and way more mail clients, right? Not all of them, but more, the most, the ones that matter the most, actually show up. So let's talk about VMCs and what you know about them.
Yeah, I know. I once had a client once upon a time who saw the spinny logos and was very infatuated with them. And she's like, I have to have this. I have to have this. And I went, okay, great. And I explained to her the process of obtaining a VMC. And the moment she heard about it, she like, I didn't hear back from her on it. And I'm like, okay, I guess it's not a priority. But there are a lot of steps that go in, and you do have to talk to the government a little bit too, which, it's not something I would want to do on a Friday night. So
Yeah.
it would have to be a real priority for me to actually acquire a BIMI.
Yeah. So we're actually going through this process right now, and this is kind of blowing my mind. So what's wild is to get the VMC, you have to have a trademarked logo. Okay. And I understand in principle why that exists. And the example that Google gave specifically makes a ton of sense, is they don't want someone to be super verified and have it say Bank of America with their phishing email, right? You don't want like sensitive, phishing emails to look super legit. The whole point is to make it hard enough, expensive enough, and enough hurdles that if you're a bad actor, you're not going to make it, or you're not going to be worthwhile, because you get shut down in like a hot second. It's
Right.
not worth the effort and the time delay. But what's kind of wild about this is that if you've never filed a trademark in the US, there's actually a really funny thing where Amazon kind of broke the US Patent and Trade Office, because Amazon did a similar decision where they tried to put off the authenticity filter on the government instead of deciding for themselves. And that's essentially what Google and Apple are doing here. Same thing as Amazon, because Amazon decided years ago that they didn't want to let sellers sell direct unless they had a trademark, because they were getting all these weird, random, scammy brands, right? And so what happened is that's why you have all these weird, random alphabet brands on Amazon, is because they want to have a unique trademark that'll sell to the trademark office. Problem is the volume. And the volume is putting them way, way, way behind on approving this. So if you don't already have a trademark, the process of saying, oh, I want to do this and I want to look legit and I want to not only have my logo, but on Google, I want to have that fancy blue check mark, right? The blue check mark we all want on all the things to say, we are too legit to quit, right? Getting to that level, you have to have a trademark. And we filed for our trademark on December 1st, 2023. We still do not have it approved. It is currently October 2024.
Oh my God.
We are very, very close. It has gone through its arbitration window, and it's just a matter of it closing now in the next month or two. But before we even have the privilege of paying $1,500 a year to add the blue check mark, we have to have our trademark, which, okay, but it takes about a year right now. So That, in my opinion, is the biggest hurdle to showing that you're authentic. But if you're a big brand, it might be worth it to show that you've locked it down, you're authentic, especially if you're in something that requires a lot of trust, right? If
Yeah.
you're in a sensitive information, 23andMe could have benefited from this before they went into their bankruptcy spot, something like that would have been really great. But, it's amazing that more of the big, Fortune 100 brands haven't done this. But I think that if you're a big brand and you have a lot at stake or you have a lot of consumer or user trust at stake, this kind of stuff is going to really matter in the coming years. But there is a huge hurdle to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. And the question is, like, it is a matter of branding and how you want to stand out in the inbox, because people are getting well over 100 emails a day to their, like, God knows how many lists I've signed up to, right? And sometimes that little, like, flashy trick that you have, like having a blank pre-header or possibly having a BIMI, that might make all the difference. It might not, but
Yeah.
it's just another thing to have in your back pocket if you are willing. And I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, if you're a Fortune 100, 500 company, I don't think there is any reason why to not have one. You
Yeah.
already have the trademarks in place. Just
Yep.
do the damn thing.
Yeah, that's the big thing. So a little tip for any small businesses out there, because we still definitely consider ourselves a small business. By definition, we're a small business. We went through LegalZoom. That's not necessarily a shout out, whatever, just who we used. And one of the tips they gave us was when you submit your trademark, do it in grayscale, black and white, because that allows you to use any color combination in the future. Whereas if you submit your trademark in color, you are locked to the colors in which you submit it. And if you're having to wait a year to file any new trademark or longer, something's 13, 14 months, which is what we originally quoted when we originally filed for length of time before it was approved, you don't want to lock yourself in. So get really comfortable with the logo you want to use, get it really well defined, do it in grayscale, find someone to submit it for you. We paid, LegalZoom was like $400 or $500 or something, which is nothing, right?
Right.
And then, like I said, because we're paying $1,500 a year for this VMC after we're done. But definitely a little tip there that I learned as a small business trying to navigate my way through what the heck is BIMI and how do we do it right.
That's a special little Snapple fact. I'm going to take that. I like that.
Yeah. Cool. So anyway, I don't think we need to necessarily belabor on BIMI too much more, but if you want to kind of give a recap about the authentication stuff, and we can direct people to next steps.
Yeah, absolutely. So the authentication stuff, like we've said, you have to make sure your DKIM SPF DMARC stuff is in place, which does mean having an email service provider that, number one, even allows you to do so and doesn't suggest otherwise, because I've heard other, and I'm not naming any names, trying to keep it neutral, but if an email service provider says, oh, you don't need to do any of that, we have our own domains, you don't trust that at all, and you set up your own stuff. So that does mean going through either hiring someone to set this DKIM SPF DMARC stuff up for you, going through the email service provider's automated process, or doing so manually, double checking to make sure it's been done correctly. And then once you have obtained your VMC and you've gone through that whole government grayscale logo stuff, right? That's when you go back to your DNS records inside of your domain provider, like Cloudflare or Bluehost or GoDaddy or whatever. And then you add the tiny little record that you're spending a lot of money for. Well, depending on who you are, you're spending 4 figures for, and you insert it inside of those records. You could do it right next to your DKIM SPF DMARC stuff. Have it in a nice little set.
Yep. And then beautiful, you show up, you're super legit, you got the receipts, and you're good to go. So if you want to learn more about this, we actually have a content team. So we actually wrote a whole blog post about this. So I'll link that in the show notes, as well as the other components for authentication, because I think they kind of go as a family. So if you're trying to learn more about DMARC, DKIM, or SPF, we've got information on that as well. Yeah, but David, I mean, I know you see a lot of these things because you're touching a lot of different newsletters. If people want to ask you a question, how would they reach out to you, and kind of what's your deal?
Yeah, absolutely. You can go to wealthyinbox.com. That's the main website. If you want to be a part of my newsletter, which is about selling newsletters and preparing yourself in a way to do so. You can go to wealthyinbox.news and just reply to the emails, man. I'm an open book. Just send them. You can find me on social media as well. Look in the show notes for the spelling of my name, because if I spelled it here, we're going to be here for the next 5 minutes. So, yeah, I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, and definitely not on TikTok, because these dance moves stay in the physical world.
Well, thanks for joining me. And, for those who are listening, hopefully we answered your questions about BIMI. You probably know more than you ever wanted to know about stupid branding, about email in the inbox. I'm Travis Ketchum, founder of Campaign Refinery. I think one of the highest performance email service providers on the market. If you want to know more about what we do, how we help you, you can hit the link in the description. But if you'd like to learn more about email marketing and direct response marketing in general, like and subscribe, all those good things. Leave a 5-star review if we influence your day. But until next time, talk soon.